It was late fall of 2019 in Briar Hollow, Ohio, and I remember thinking how quiet everything felt. Not peaceful quiet. Not the kind that makes you grateful. Just still. Like something was waiting. Our house was the same one we'd lived in for years. The same creaky hallway floorboards, the same kitchen light that flickered if you didn't twist the bulb just right. The same ordinary life that had always felt predictable. But that week, predictability started to feel like a thin sheet over something unstable. I didn't have a clear reason at first. Nothing dramatic had happened. No shouting. No slammed doors. No obvious betrayal. Just little moments that didn't sit right. My husband had started coming home later than usual. Not outrageously late. Not the kind of late that raises alarms immediately. More like an hour. Sometimes 2. He always had a reason ready. Long meeting. Traffic was awful. Had to help someone finish something up. And maybe that should have been normal. People get busy. Jobs get demanding. Life shifts. But it was the way he said it. Too quick. Too rehearsed. Like he'd already practiced explaining himself before he even walked through the door. I remember standing at the sink one evening, rinsing a plate that didn't really need rinsing, just to have something to do with my hands. The driveway lights came on. His car door shut. And my chest tightened before I even saw him. That was new. That feeling, like my body knew something my mind hadn't admitted yet. He came in, keys in hand, smiling like he always did. "Hey," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I let him. But it felt like watching myself do it from far away. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He nodded, already walking toward the hallway.
"Yeah."
Just exhausted. Exhausted. That word became a shield. It ended conversations before they started. It excused distance. It made me feel unreasonable for wanting more. Over the next few days, it wasn't just the late nights. It was the phone. He'd always had his phone, of course. Everyone does. But suddenly it was always face down. Always within reach. If I walked into a room, he'd tilt the screen slightly, like he didn't even realize he was doing it. Or maybe he did. One night, we were sitting on the couch, the TV on but neither of us watching. His phone buzzed. He glanced down fast. Too fast. I saw the corner of his mouth twitch, almost like a smile that didn't belong in that moment. He stood up immediately. "I'm gonna take this," he said. "It's almost 10, I replied without thinking. He paused. Just a second. Then he gave a small shrug. "Work thing." And he walked into the kitchen. I sat there, listening to the muffled sound of his voice. Not loud enough to catch words. Just soft enough to know he was being careful. I told myself it wasn't anything. That I was being paranoid. That after 15 years with someone, you start to imagine problems because you've seen too many stories about them. But I also knew something else. After 15 years with someone, you know their rhythms. You know their silences. And his silence wasn't the same anymore. It had an edge to it. Like it was holding something back. The next morning, I brought it up gently. "Are you stressed about something?" He looked up from his coffee. "No. Just that." "No." I tried again. "You've seemed distracted lately." He sighed like I was asking him to solve a math problem he didn't care about. "I'm fine. It's just work." Work. Another shield. I nodded, swallowing whatever else I wanted to say. Because what could I say? I didn't have proof. I didn't have a clear accusation. I only had a feeling. And feelings are easy to dismiss, even to yourself. The thing about betrayal, at least in the beginning, is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock on your door and introduce itself. It seeps in slowly. It changes the air. I noticed the unexplained absences next. Quick errands that took too long. Trips to the store where he came back with barely anything. I ran into someone, he'd say. Or, lost track of time. Once, I asked, who'd you run into? He blinked. Just someone from work. I waited for a name. It didn't come. He went upstairs instead. That night, I lay in bed beside him, listening to his breathing. He fell asleep quickly. I didn't. I stared into the dark, trying to pinpoint the exact moment things shifted. Trying to convince myself I was imagining it. But the unease didn't leave. It settled into me. Like a stone. A few days later, I was folding laundry in our bedroom when his phone lit up on the dresser. A message preview flashed across the screen. I didn't even mean to look. It's instinct. Bright screen. Movement. I saw only 2 words before it disappeared. Miss you. That was it. 2 words. No name. No context. But my stomach dropped so hard it felt physical. I froze with a towel in my hands. My first thought was ridiculous. Maybe it was his brother. Maybe it was an old friend. Maybe someone was joking. My mind scrambled for explanations faster than my heart could keep up. When he came into the room, I forced myself to keep folding. My voice came out too high. Someone misses you. He stopped. I could feel it. I didn't even need to look up. Then he laughed. A quick, awkward sound. Oh, it's nothing. Nothing. He reached for the phone, checking it. His thumb moved quickly, and then he slipped it into his pocket. I waited. He didn't offer more. He just leaned down, kissed the top of my head like a father might, and said, "You worry too much." That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was cruel. Because it was dismissive. Like my worry was the problem. Not whatever caused it. I didn't push. I told myself to let it go. To be normal. To not become one of those couples who pick at each other until there's nothing left. But something had already changed. And once you feel that shift, it's hard to unfeel it. That weekend, we went to a small gathering at a neighbor's house. People were laughing, talking, drinking cheap wine. Everyone looked happy. Normal. I watched my husband across the room. He smiled when someone spoke to him. He nodded at jokes. But it felt like he was performing. Like he was present in body only. At one point, he stepped outside to take a call. I followed a minute later, telling myself it was only because it was cold inside. I opened the back door quietly. He was standing near the fence, phone to his ear. His voice was low. Then, for just a moment, he smiled. A real smile. Soft. Private. Not meant for me. He turned slightly, and I stepped back before he could see. My heart pounded so loudly I thought he'd hear it through the wall. I went back inside, gripping my glass too hard. The rest of the night felt like I was floating. Like I was watching my life from the outside. When we got home, he went straight to the shower. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the carpet. My mind was doing what it had been doing for days. Asking questions I didn't want to answer. Is there someone else? Am I losing my grip? What if it's nothing? What if it isn't? When he came out, towel around his waist, he looked at me. You okay? I forced a smile.
Yeah.
Just tired. He nodded, as if that explained everything. He climbed into bed, turned off the lamp, and within minutes, his breathing slowed. I stayed awake. The darkness felt heavier than usual. And lying there beside him, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to say yet. I didn't know what was happening. But I could feel, deep down, that whatever it was, had already started. When I think back on us, on the beginning, it's hard to match the man I married with the distance I felt in that house years later. It's confusing. Even now. Because it wasn't like we started broken. We weren't one of those couples who were always fighting or barely holding things together. We were steady. Simple. The kind of relationship people described as solid. I met him when I was younger, before life got complicated. Back then, Briar Hollow felt even smaller, like everyone knew everyone's business, like the whole town moved at the same slow pace. He came into my life quietly. Not with grand gestures. Not with charm that demanded attention. He was just consistent. We met through mutual friends at a local event. I remember thinking he wasn't trying too hard, which was rare. He listened more than he talked. When he did speak, it was thoughtful, like he meant what he said. That mattered to me. I dated people who filled silence just to avoid it. People who were exciting but unreliable. He wasn't like that. With him, things felt calm. Safe. Our first few months weren't dramatic. We went on normal dates. Coffee. Walks around town. Late dinners where we stayed longer than we meant to because conversation didn't feel forced. I remember one night, we were sitting in his car outside my apartment, neither of us moving to get out. He looked over at me and said, almost casually, I don't really like wasting time. I laughed. Wasting time doing what? He shrugged. Being with people who don't matter. It wasn't a line. It didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded like truth. And I believed him. We built slowly. That's the thing people don't talk about enough. Real trust doesn't come from fireworks. It comes from repetition. From showing up again and again until it becomes normal to rely on someone. He showed up. When my job got stressful, he was there. When my dad got sick, he was there. When I doubted myself, he steadied me. It wasn't loud love. It was dependable love. After a couple of years, marriage didn't feel like a leap. It felt like the natural next step. I remember standing in front of him on our wedding day, thinking, this is the person I'll grow old with. This is my safe place. The ceremony was small. Nothing extravagant. Family, friends, the kind of celebration that felt personal instead of staged. He cried a little when I walked down the aisle. That detail stayed with me. Because he wasn't the type to cry easily. At the reception, he held my hand like he didn't want to let go, even when people pulled us into conversations. Later that night, when it was just us, he said, I'm going to take care of you. And I didn't hear it as a promise of control. I heard it as loyalty. For years, it was. We settled into married life the way most people do. Working, saving, planning. We bought the house with the creaky hallway floors. Painted the kitchen ourselves. Argued gently about curtain colors and whether we needed a bigger couch. Normal arguments. The kind you forget the next day. When we had our first child, everything shifted. Not in a bad way. Just bigger. Life expanded. He was nervous in the hospital, pacing more than I expected. When the baby finally cried, he looked terrified and amazed at the same time. I watched him hold that tiny body so carefully, like he was afraid of breaking something precious. And I thought, this is who he is. A good man. A good father. Over the next years, our life filled up the way lives do. School drop-offs. Birthday parties. Grocery lists stuck to the fridge. Holidays at relatives' houses. The slow blur of routine that somehow becomes everything. We weren't perfect. We had dry spells. We had moments where we misunderstood each other. There were weeks we were too tired to talk about anything beyond schedules. But I never doubted the core of us. I never doubted that he was mine and I was his. We were a team. That's what I believed. And in a way, it made me careless. Not careless in a reckless sense. Careless in the way you get when you feel secure. I didn't look over my shoulder. I didn't question where he was. I didn't wonder what he was doing on his phone. Because why would I? 15 years is a long time. It builds a kind of certainty that feels unshakable. People talk about trust like it's a decision. Like you choose it once. But trust is something you live inside of. It becomes the air. And you don't notice it until it changes. He had always been predictable. If he said he'd be home at 6, he was home at 6. If he said he'd take care of something, it got done. He didn't flirt. He didn't hide things. He wasn't secretive. So when small changes began much later, they didn't fit into the person I thought I knew. That's why it took me so long to let myself feel uneasy. Because the foundation was real. Or at least, it felt real. We had memories layered over years. Anniversaries. Vacations. Quiet mornings where we drank coffee in silence and it felt comfortable, not empty. We'd survived hard things together. I thought surviving meant something. I thought time meant something. Sometimes I look back and wonder if I missed signs even then. If there were cracks I ignored because they were easy to ignore. But the truth is, for most of our marriage, I was happy. I felt chosen. I felt known. And that's what made the later shift so disorienting. Because betrayal doesn't just break your heart. It breaks your understanding of your own life. It makes you question whether the past was as solid as you believed, or if it was only solid because you didn't look too closely. That night in late 2019, lying awake beside him, I wasn't just afraid of losing my marriage. I was afraid of losing the story I'd been living in for 15 years. And I didn't yet know how fragile that story really was. Our life wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of life people post about to make others jealous. It was quiet. And for a long time, quiet felt like success. We lived in a modest neighborhood where the lawns were never perfect, but everyone waved when you drove by. Kids rode bikes in the afternoons. Dogs barked behind fences. The seasons moved through town like a familiar routine. Our house held years of ordinary moments. The kind that don't feel important while you're living them. School pictures taped to the fridge. A chipped mug we never replaced. A spot on the couch where he always sat. My days were built around repetition. Wake up early. Make breakfast. Pack lunches. Remind someone to find their shoes. The small chaos of family life that becomes second nature. He would come down the stairs adjusting his tie, already half focused on the day ahead. Sometimes he'd kiss my forehead on the way out. Sometimes he'd just say, "See you later." And I never thought twice about either version. Because this was what marriage looked like after years. Not constant romance. Just presence. Just being there. When the kids were younger, everything felt like motion. Sports practices. Doctor appointments. Birthday parties at bowling alleys. Grocery runs that somehow took 2 hours. We were always tired, always busy, always talking about logistics. Did you sign the permission slip? Can you pick up milk on the way home? We have to be there by 6. It wasn't exciting conversation. But it was life. And underneath it, I believed there was something steady. I believed we were still us. The truth is, over time, the marriage became the structure holding everything up. Not just emotionally. Practically. Financially. Socially. We weren't just two people in love. We were a unit. A household. A shared history. I didn't fully realize how much my identity had braided itself into that until much later. When you've been with someone for that long, you stop thinking of yourself as separate. Decisions become automatic. We. Us. Ours. The kids would say, "Mom, are we doing anything this weekend?" And I'd answer without even checking. "Well, your dad works Saturday morning, so." Like his schedule was the weather. A fixed thing. I trusted him like you trust gravity. I didn't feel like I needed to monitor anything. I didn't feel like I needed to ask. There was comfort in that. But there was also dependence, even if I didn't call it that. He handled certain parts of life. The bills. The car repairs. The things I never wanted to think about. I handled the rest. The emotional texture of the house. The holidays. The kids' needs. We had fallen into roles without ever officially choosing them. And it worked. Until it didn't. I remember one afternoon, years before the shift, when I was sick with the flu. I could barely sit up. He came home early with soup and medicine, told me to go back to bed, and managed the kids for the evening without complaint. I watched him move through the kitchen, making dinner, cleaning up, helping with homework. And I felt this rush of gratitude. This certainty that I had chosen right. Those moments become the proof you rely on. They become the foundation you point to when doubts try to creep in. He's a good man, I would think. Look at him. Look at what we've built. Our kids were growing fast. By 2019, they weren't little anymore. They didn't need constant supervision. The house was quieter. And in some ways, I thought that would bring us closer again. Less chaos. More space for each other. But what I didn't anticipate was how much space can reveal distance. When the kids were small, there was always noise to fill the gaps. When things calmed down, I started noticing the silences between us. The way he stayed in his office longer at night. The way he seemed elsewhere even when he was sitting right beside me. I tried to tell myself it was normal. Middle age. Work stress. Life. But there was something else too. I had become emotionally used to him being my anchor. When you spend years leaning on something, you don't realize how much weight you've put there. I didn't have close friendships the way I used to. I didn't go out much. My world was home, family, routines. And he was at the center of it. Not because he demanded it. Because life happened that way. Slowly. Naturally. Or so it seemed. Sometimes, I'd catch myself watching him the way you watch someone you love when you're not sure they know how much they matter. He'd be reading something on his phone, expression blank. And I'd feel this strange flicker of panic. Like, what if I don't know him as well as I think? The thought would pass. I'd scold myself for being dramatic. 15 years doesn't disappear overnight. People don't just change into strangers. That's what I believed. We had rituals. Sunday mornings, pancakes. Friday nights, a movie we half-watched. Summer trips to the same lake. These patterns made life feel secure. Predictable. But looking back, routines can be deceptive. They can keep you from noticing when the emotional foundation underneath them starts to erode. Because everything looks the same from the outside. The kids still went to school. Dinner still got cooked. Laundry still got folded. He still came home. Just later. Just quieter. Just with his attention divided in ways I couldn't yet name. And the hardest part was that I didn't know how to ask for reassurance without sounding ridiculous. What do you say? Are you still mine? Are we still real? Do you still choose this life? Those aren't questions you casually bring up after 15 years. So instead, I stayed quiet. I waited for him to return to normal. I told myself not to be needy. Not to create problems. Because when your entire life is built around something, you become afraid of shaking it too hard. You become afraid of what might fall apart. That was where I was in late 2019. Living inside a life that looked intact. While feeling, deep down, that something was starting to loosen. And I couldn't tell yet if it was just my imagination. Or if the ground beneath us was already shifting. At first, the changes were so small I almost felt embarrassed noticing them. Like I was searching for problems. Like I had too much time to think. Because on paper, nothing was wrong. He was still going to work. Still coming home. Still eating dinner with us. Still asking the kids about school. If someone had asked me directly, "Is your marriage okay?" I would have said yes. Maybe with a pause. But still yes. The shift wasn't something you could point to. It was something you sensed. It started with his energy. He used to walk into the house and feel present, even if he was tired. He'd drop his keys in the bowl by the door, loosen his tie, sigh in that familiar way that meant the day was over. Lately, he came in like he was only passing through. His mind stayed somewhere else. He'd answer questions half a beat late. "Did you hear what I said?" I'd ask.
Yeah.
"Sorry. Long day. Always the long day. Always work." I began hearing the same phrases so often they stopped sounding real. Another change was how quickly he seemed to detach. If the kids were loud, he'd retreat to the bedroom. If I asked him to help with something small, he'd say, "In a minute," and the minute wouldn't come. He wasn't cruel. That's what made it hard. He wasn't snapping at us or acting openly hostile. He was just slipping away. Like a slow tide. One evening, I asked if he wanted to go for a walk after dinner, something we used to do sometimes when the weather was nice. He hesitated. Maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. Instead, he sat with his phone, thumb scrolling, eyes fixed. I watched him from the kitchen doorway. Not in an accusatory way. More like I was trying to understand. "What are you looking at?" I asked lightly. He didn't look up. Just stuff. Stuff. Such a vague word. I would have accepted almost any answer. Sports scores. News. A funny video. But stuff felt like a curtain being pulled shut. I told myself not to push. Then there was the way he started dressing differently. Not dramatically. Just small adjustments. A nicer shirt for work. Cologne I hadn't smelled in a while. Checking his reflection before leaving. Once, I joked, "Since when do you care about matching your shoes?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Just trying to look professional. Professional. Another shield. I tried to laugh it off, but something in me tightened. Because it wasn't really about shoes. It was about attention. Where his attention was going. There were also absences that didn't add up. He'd say he had to stop by the office on a Saturday. Or run an errand after work. He'd be gone longer than expected, and when he came back, he'd seem strangely energized, not tired. Almost lighter. And I hated myself for noticing that. Because what kind of wife watches her husband's moods like a detective? I didn't want to be that person. But I couldn't stop. One afternoon, I called him while he was supposedly on his way home. He didn't answer. I tried again 10 minutes later. Still nothing. When he walked in nearly an hour later, I asked, "Hey, I was calling. Everything okay?" He blinked like he had to reset. "Oh. Sorry. Phone died." His phone was always charged. Always. He carried a portable charger everywhere. But I nodded anyway. Because calling him out felt like stepping onto thin ice. A few days after that, I noticed he'd started taking his phone with him everywhere. To the bathroom. To the basement. Even outside to check the mail. It was almost subconscious, like a reflex. Once, I reached toward the counter where it was sitting, not even to look, just to move it out of the way while I wiped up a spill. His hand shot out faster than I expected. "I've got it," he said. Too sharp. Too quick. I froze. Then he softened immediately. "Sorry. Habit. I just need it for work." Work again. That word was becoming a wall between us. I started sleeping lighter. I don't know if it was anxiety or instinct, but I woke up more often in the night. Sometimes I'd hear the faint glow of his screen. Sometimes I'd feel him shift out of bed, quiet as possible. Once, I opened my eyes and saw him standing near the window, phone in hand, typing. He noticed me move and slipped it into his pocket. "Couldn't sleep," he whispered. I wanted to ask who he was texting it to in the morning. Instead, I just said, "Oh." He climbed back into bed. His back was to me. The space between us felt wider than the mattress. During the day, I tried to act normal. I packed lunches. Went through schedules. Made small talk. But inside, my thoughts kept circling. Something is off. Something is off. I started replaying conversations, looking for clues. Trying to see if I was overreacting. Because doubt is a strange thing. It makes you question yourself before you question anyone else. Maybe I was being insecure. Maybe I was bored. Maybe I was reading into nothing because life had gotten quieter. But then there would be another moment. A look. A pause. A sudden defensiveness. Like one night at dinner, I asked about his week. He shrugged. Same as always. But his eyes didn't stay on mine. They flicked away. And I felt that same drop in my stomach. After dinner, while the kids were upstairs, I tried again. "Is something going on?" He looked genuinely irritated. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. You just seem far away." He exhaled hard. "I'm not far away. I'm right here." "But you don't feel here," I said quietly. That made him go still. For a second, I thought maybe he'd open up. Maybe he'd admit he was stressed or unhappy or overwhelmed. Instead, his expression closed. "You're imagining things," he said. There it was. That phrase. The beginning of something else. I felt my face warm. "I'm not trying to accuse you," I said quickly. "I just..." "Then stop," he cut in. The sharpness startled me more than the words. We didn't usually speak like that. He stood up, taking his plate to the sink. "I don't have the energy for this." And just like that, the conversation ended. Not resolved. Just shut down. I stayed sitting at the table, hands folded in my lap, listening to the water run. It felt like standing outside a door that had quietly locked. That night, in bed, he reached for me the way he always had. An arm across my waist. A familiar touch. But it felt unfamiliar. Like the gesture was muscle memory, not emotion. I stared into the dark, trying to hold on to the life we'd built. Trying to believe this was just a phase. A rough patch. Stress. Anything. But deep down, something inside me was starting to whisper a truth I wasn't ready to name. And once that whisper starts, it's hard to silence it again. After that conversation at the dinner table, I became more careful. Not because I felt satisfied. Because I felt warned. There was something in the way he shut me down that made me understand I was stepping into territory he didn't want touched. So I started swallowing things. The questions. The instincts. The discomfort that kept rising in my chest. I told myself I was being smart. Keeping the peace. But really, I was shrinking. And the more I shrank, the lonelier I felt. I didn't talk to anyone about it. Not my friends. Not my family. How do you even start? Hi, I think my husband might be lying to me, but I have no proof and maybe I'm just losing my mind. It felt humiliating. It felt dramatic. So I kept it inside. The days continued as normal on the surface. Breakfast. Work. Kids. Dinner. Laundry. But underneath, I was walking around in a kind of fog. Everything felt slightly unreal. Like the air in the house had changed, even if nothing visible had. I started noticing how often he used my uncertainty against me. Not aggressively. Not overtly. Almost casually. If I asked where he'd been, he'd tilt his head like I was strange. Why do you always need to know exactly where I am? If I mentioned he seemed distant, he'd sigh. You've been so sensitive lately. Sensitive. That word landed like a slap, even though it wasn't shouted. It made my feelings sound irrational. Like they weren't worth taking seriously. One evening, he came home after 9. The kids were already in bed. I was sitting in the living room with the lamp on, pretending to read. He walked in quietly. Hey, he said, hanging his coat. Hey, I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. He glanced at me. What? Nothing. Just one word. But it carried irritation. Like my presence was an accusation. Nothing, I said. I just thought you'd be home earlier. He frowned. I told you. Work ran late. You didn't text. I was busy. I paused. I worry. He gave a short laugh. You worry about everything. There it was again. Not concern. Not reassurance. A dismissal. Like my worry was an annoying personality trait instead of a reaction. I felt my throat tighten. I'm not trying to start anything, I said softly. It's just, I miss you. That was the truth underneath everything. I missed him. Even though he was still here. Even though he was still technically my husband. He looked at me for a long moment, expression unreadable. Then he said, "You're making this into something it isn't." And he walked past me toward the stairs. I sat there alone, the lamp buzzing faintly, feeling foolish for admitting anything. Over the next weeks, his denial became its own reality. Anytime I tried to speak about the distance, he turned it back on me. You're imagining things. You're overthinking. You always assume the worst. At first, I argued. Then I started doubting myself. Because when someone you've trusted for years looks you in the eye and insists nothing is wrong, it messes with your sense of perception. You begin scanning yourself for defects. Am I paranoid? Am I insecure? Am I creating problems where there aren't any? I started replaying my own behavior. Wondering if I'd changed. If I was being unfair. If I was projecting. It was exhausting. And it made me quieter. I noticed I began apologizing more. For asking questions. For expressing feelings. I'm sorry, I'd say, even when I wasn't sure what I'd done wrong. He accepted the apologies like they were natural. Like it was appropriate for me to feel ashamed. One Saturday morning, I asked if he wanted to take the kids to a fall festival in town. Something local. Simple. He didn't even look up from his phone. I can't. I have things to do. What things? I asked before I could stop myself. His eyes flicked to mine. There you go again. My stomach dropped. I was just asking. He sighed dramatically, like he was dealing with a problem. I don't understand why you need to interrogate everything. Interrogate. That word was heavy. It made me sound controlling. It made me sound unreasonable. I backed off immediately. Okay, I whispered. He stood up, grabbing his jacket. I'll be back later. The door shut behind him. I stared at it for a long time. Later, when the kids asked, "Where's Dad?" I forced a smile. He's busy with work stuff. Work stuff. I was starting to speak his language. Covering for his distance. Protecting the illusion. But inside, I felt smaller every day. The isolation wasn't just physical. It was emotional. He was right there, yet unreachable. And because I wasn't telling anyone else, it felt like I was carrying something heavy alone. Sometimes, I'd sit in the car after grocery shopping, keys in my hand, not ready to go back inside. Because inside meant pretending. Pretending everything was fine. Pretending I wasn't slowly unraveling. One night, I finally tried again. Not accusing. Just honest. We were in the kitchen. The house was quiet. I said, "Do you still want to be here?" He froze. Then he turned slowly, eyebrows raised. What kind of question is that? I don't know, I admitted. I just feel like you're gone. His face hardened. You're being ridiculous. The word hit me like ice. Ridiculous. I felt tears sting, but I blinked them back. I'm not trying to be. He shook his head, almost disgusted. I can't do this every day. You're exhausting. Exhausting. Not the situation. Not the distance. Me. I stood there, speechless. Because what do you say when someone makes your pain into a burden? He walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with the hum of the refrigerator. I leaned against the counter, breathing shallowly, like I'd been running. For the first time, I wondered if maybe the worst part wasn't whatever he was hiding. Maybe the worst part was the way he was making me feel crazy for noticing. The way he was rewriting reality in front of me. I started to realize something quietly, painfully. Even before I had answers. Even before I had proof. I was already losing something. Not just trust. Not just closeness. I was losing my sense of solid ground. And I didn't yet know how far that fog was going to spread. The moment I found out wasn't dramatic in the way people imagine. There was no screaming. No cinematic confrontation. It was quieter than that. And maybe that's why it still feels so sharp in my memory. Because it happened in the middle of an ordinary day. Like betrayal didn't need an announcement. It could just appear. It was a weekday afternoon. The kids were still at school. The house was unusually still. I had spent most of the morning doing small chores, trying to keep myself busy, trying not to think too much. I told myself, again, that I was overreacting. That I was tired. That marriage had seasons. That I needed to calm down. He had left early that morning, coffee in hand, barely stopping long enough for a
goodbye.
I watched his car pull out of the driveway and felt that familiar tightness in my chest. Then I went back inside and tried to focus on life. At some point, I sat down at the computer in the home office. It wasn't really my computer. It was ours. Shared. The one we used for bills, school emails, calendar stuff. Normal family things. I needed to print a form for one of the kids, something for a school trip. I clicked around, opening the browser. And at first, nothing seemed unusual. Just tabs. Just a few pages. Then something caught my eye. A messaging window. It was already open. Minimized, like whoever had been using it hadn't fully closed it out. I stared at it for a second. My first instinct was to ignore it. To respect privacy. To be the kind of wife who trusts. But something in me hesitated. Not curiosity. Something heavier. Like my body recognized a threat before my mind did. I told myself I was only going to close it. Just tidy up the screen. So I clicked. And the window expanded. It loaded slowly, like the computer was thinking about whether it should let me see. Then suddenly, there it was. A conversation thread. Not with a family member. Not with a coworker asking about schedules. Not with someone planning a surprise party. It was personal. Immediately personal. The first line I saw made my stomach drop. Last night was hard. I can't stop thinking about you. I blinked. Read it again. My brain didn't accept it at first. I scrolled slightly, almost unconsciously. More lines. More messages. Not vague. Not ambiguous. Intimate. Familiar in a way that didn't belong to me. My hands went cold. I remember gripping the edge of the desk like I needed something solid. For a moment, I honestly thought I might pass out. The words on the screen didn't feel real. They felt like something I was accidentally reading from someone else's life. But then I saw his name in the replies. His writing style. The way he used certain phrases. The same casual shorthand he used with me. Except it wasn't for me. One message stood out because it was so unmistakable. I miss you. I hate pretending at home. Home. The word punched through me. Because home was where I was. Home was where our children were. Home was where I'd been folding laundry and cooking dinner and trying to keep our life intact. And here he was, typing about pretending. My vision blurred. I don't know if it was tears or shock. I kept scrolling, even though every part of me wanted to stop. It was like watching something terrible unfold and not being able to look away. There were references to meetings. To stolen moments. To how careful they had to be. There were messages that were explicit enough that there was no room for interpretation. No room for denial. This wasn't an emotional friendship. This wasn't harmless flirting. This was an affair. My throat tightened so hard I could barely swallow. I covered my mouth with my hand. The room felt suddenly too small. Too bright. I remember looking around as if the walls might explain something. As if the house itself could tell me I was misreading. But the screen stayed the same. The words didn't change. I sat back slowly, almost gently, like any sudden movement would break me. My heart was beating so hard it hurt. I tried to breathe, but it came out shallow. In that moment, I felt something split inside me. Like the version of my life I believed in cracked straight down the middle. I thought about all the times he'd told me I was imagining things. All the times he'd sighed, rolled his eyes, acted like my concern was irrational. And here it was. Not imaginary. Not sensitivity. Not paranoia. Reality. Sitting on our shared computer like it belonged there. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes. Maybe an hour. Time stopped meaning anything. At some point, I heard a car outside and jolted, panicked, thinking it was him coming home early. But it wasn't. Just a neighbor. Still, my pulse wouldn't slow. I finally forced myself to stand. My legs felt weak, like they might not hold me. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hands shook so much I spilled some onto the counter. I stared at the spill. Such a small thing. Water. And yet my entire world felt like it was spilling over too. I tried to think logically. What do I do? Do I take pictures? Do I close the window? Do I confront him immediately? Do I call someone? But my mind was fogged. All I could hear was the echo of those words. I hate pretending at home. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. I thought about our children. About the life we had. About 15 years of trust. About the man sleeping beside me at night while sending messages like that. My stomach churned. I felt nauseous. The betrayal wasn't just sexual. It was the lying. The rewriting of reality. The way he had looked at me and dismissed me while carrying this. That was what hurt in a deeper place. Later that afternoon, he texted. Running late. Don't wait up for dinner. I stared at the message. My hands were steady now. Too steady. Something in me had gone numb. Running late. Of course. I looked back toward the office where the computer sat. The evidence was still there. Waiting. I realized then that I could never go back to not knowing. Even if I wanted to. Even if he apologized. Even if he denied it. I had seen it. And seeing it changed something permanently. When the kids came home, I smiled for them. I helped with homework. I asked about their day. I moved through the motions like an actor who hadn't been told the play was over. Inside, I was screaming. But outside, nothing could break yet. Not until I knew what came next. That evening, I heard his car pull into the driveway. The same sound as always. The same headlights sweeping across the living room wall. He walked in like it was just another day. Hey, he said casually. And I looked at him, standing there in our doorway, and I realized with absolute clarity. I would never see him the same way again. I didn't confront him right away. Not because I was unsure. Because I didn't know who I was in that moment. I felt like someone had taken my life, folded it up neatly, and handed it back to me with the edges torn. That evening, after the kids were in their rooms and the house was quiet again, he moved around like nothing had changed. He opened the fridge. Asked what was for dinner. Mentioned something about work. Work. Always work. I watched him speak, watched his face, and it was almost unbearable how normal he seemed. Like he hadn't left pieces of himself on a screen for me to find. Like I wasn't sitting across from someone I suddenly didn't recognize. I think part of me was waiting for him to crack on his own. To show guilt. To confess without forcing me to say the words out loud. But he didn't. He ate. He scrolled on his phone. He asked the kids, how was school? The performance was flawless. And that was what finally pushed me over the edge. Because it meant I was alone in this truth. So later, when the lights were off downstairs and the only sound was the faint hum of the dishwasher, I followed him into our bedroom. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, pulling off his socks. I stood in the doorway for a second, feeling my heart hammer. He glanced up. What's wrong? His voice was almost annoyed, like he could sense a problem coming. I stepped inside slowly. I need to ask you something. He exhaled. Okay. My mouth was dry. I could feel the words sitting in my throat like stones. I saw messages, I said. He froze. just for a fraction of a second. So small I might have missed it if I wasn't watching him so closely. Then his face shifted into something blank. What messages? The question was too quick. Too controlled. I swallowed. On the computer. The conversation you left open. His eyes narrowed, and immediately I felt the air change. His shoulders stiffened. What are you talking about? I stared at him. My hands were shaking, but my voice came out steadier than I expected. I saw what you wrote. I saw what she wrote. Silence. For a moment, I thought maybe he'd finally drop the act. Maybe he'd sink, admit it, say he was sorry. Instead, he stood up abruptly. You were going through my stuff? There it was. The pivot. Not guilt. Not shame. Anger. My stomach tightened. I wasn't going through anything, I said. It was open. I needed to print. So you read my private conversations. I blinked. Private conversations. With someone he missed. With someone he was thinking about at night. I read enough, I said quietly. Enough to know what it was. He scoffed, shaking his head like I was ridiculous. This is unbelievable. My chest burned. Unbelievable? I repeated. He paced a few steps, dragging a hand through his hair. You are seriously doing this right now? I felt like I was losing balance. Doing this. As if I was the one creating the crisis. I didn't make those messages appear, I said, voice rising slightly. I didn't write them. He turned sharply. You don't know what you saw. The words hit hard. I stared at him. I know exactly what I saw. He laughed, but it was cold. You're twisting it. How? It's complicated. It's work stuff. People joke. My mouth fell open slightly. Joke? I whispered. You told her you miss her. You said you hate pretending at home. His face tightened. That could mean anything. Anything. The room felt surreal. I felt like I was arguing with someone determined to deny reality no matter how clear it was. You can't seriously stand here and act like this is nothing, I said. I'm not acting, he snapped. You're the one acting like some kind of victim over a few lines on a screen. A few lines. My hands curled into fists at my sides. A few lines? My voice cracked. Those lines are my marriage. He stared at me for a long moment. Then his expression shifted into something almost bored. You're overreacting. That phrase again. Like a stamp he kept pressing onto everything I felt. Overreacting. I felt tears sting my eyes, not because I wanted to cry, but because my body couldn't hold everything in anymore. How can you say that? I whispered. How can you look at me and say I'm overreacting when you've been? He cut me off sharply. Stop. I flinched. I'm not doing this, he said. I'm not standing here being accused of something you've decided is true. Accused. Decided. Like the proof didn't exist. Like I had invented it. I didn't decide, I said. You did. When you wrote it. His jaw clenched. You have no idea what my life is like right now. I stared at him. What his life was like. As if I wasn't living the consequences of it. What about my life? I asked, voice trembling. What about our kids? What about what you've been doing to us? He looked away. For a second, I thought maybe that was it. The crack. The moment of truth. But when he looked back, his eyes were hard. You're making this bigger than it is. I felt something inside me begin to break. Not the marriage. Something deeper. My ability to reach him. I just want you to tell me the truth, I said softly. He shook his head. The truth is you've been paranoid for months. You've been looking for something to be wrong. That sentence landed like a punch. I stared at him, stunned. You're saying this is my fault? I'm saying you're exhausting, he replied flatly. You never stop. You always think something is happening. My throat tightened. I could barely speak. I thought we had 15 years, I managed. He shrugged slightly. Maybe that's the problem. You think that means something can never change. Change. Such a clean word for betrayal. I felt my knees weaken and sat down on the edge of the bed. The room spun slightly. He stood above me, arms crossed, like this was an argument he could win if he stayed firm enough. And maybe he could. Because denial is powerful when it comes from someone you love. It warps everything. I looked up at him. Are you telling me nothing happened? His eyes held mine. Yes. Just yes. So simple. So absolute. Even after everything. Even with the words burned into my mind. I felt the tears finally spill over. Not loud sobbing. Just silent, steady. He watched me for a moment, then sighed like I was inconveniencing him. I can't deal with this tonight, he muttered. He grabbed a pillow from the bed and started toward the door. Where are you going? I asked, voice small. Downstairs, he said. I need space from this. From this. From me. From the truth sitting between us. The door closed behind him. I sat alone in our bedroom, listening to his footsteps fade away. The house felt enormous. Empty. And what hurt most wasn't even the affair. It was the way he looked at me and chose denial over honesty. Like destroying my reality was easier than admitting his own. That night, I realized the confrontation hadn't brought clarity. It had only opened a deeper kind of darkness. And I didn't yet know what I was standing on anymore. The next morning, the house looked the same. Sunlight came through the kitchen window. The coffee maker gurgled. The clock above the stove ticked steadily, indifferent. But nothing felt the same. It was like someone had moved all the furniture an inch to the left. Familiar, but wrong. I barely slept. I heard him moving downstairs at some point in the night, the television murmuring faintly through the floor. I didn't go after him. I didn't have anything left to say. By the time morning came, I felt hollowed out. The kids came down for breakfast, half awake, complaining about school like they always did. I smiled automatically. I poured cereal. I reminded them about jackets. My body moved through routine, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. He came up from the basement while they were eating. He looked tired, but not guilty. Just tired. He didn't look at me. He poured himself coffee like it was a normal weekday. The silence between us was thick. One of the kids asked him something about the weekend. He answered casually. Normal voice. Normal father. I watched him, stunned by how easily he could do that. Like he could compartmentalize our marriage into something that only existed when convenient. When the kids left for school, the house fell quiet again. He stood near the counter, scrolling on his phone. I waited for him to say something. Anything. A confession. An apology. A crack in the denial. Instead, he cleared his throat. I have an early meeting. That was it. That was the only thing he offered. I stared at him. So we're just doing this? I asked softly. He didn't look up. Doing what? My chest tightened. Pretending nothing happened. He sighed, finally meeting my eyes with a look that made me feel like I was the problem. I told you, you misunderstood. Misunderstood. As if betrayal was a miscommunication. I shook my head slowly. I didn't misunderstand what I read. He grabbed his keys. I can't keep having this conversation, he said, voice flat. Then he walked out the door. Just like that. No resolution. No tenderness. Nothing. The car backed out. The driveway lights clicked off. And I stood alone in the kitchen with my hands gripping the edge of the counter so hard my fingers hurt. That was the beginning of the collapse. Not a dramatic explosion. A quiet disintegration. Over the next days, our home became unfamiliar territory. We moved around each other like strangers sharing space. He stayed out later. I stopped asking why. Not because I didn't care. Because asking only gave him an opportunity to dismiss me again. Meals were awkward. The kids sensed something, even if they didn't know what. They asked, "Is Dad okay?" I said yes. I said it automatically. Because what else could I say? My world was cracking and I was still packing lunches. Still reminding them about homework. Still pretending for their sake. At night, he slept downstairs more often. Sometimes he claimed he fell asleep watching TV. Sometimes he didn't explain at all. I lay in our bed alone, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle and creak. Every sound felt louder. Every silence felt heavier. I began to understand something I hadn't fully grasped before. An affair doesn't just break trust. It rearranges the entire emotional landscape. It makes every memory feel suspect. Every gesture feel uncertain. When he did speak to me, it was logistical. Did you pay the electric bill? Can you pick up more detergent? As if we were coworkers managing a household. Not partners. Not spouses. Once, I tried again, quietly. I caught him in the hallway. Please, I said. Just talk to me. Just be honest. He looked at me like I was asking him to confess to a crime he'd already decided wasn't real. I don't know what you want me to say. The truth, I whispered. His face hardened. The truth is I'm tired of being accused. Accused. That word again. I felt something inside me go cold. Because it wasn't just denial anymore. It was revision. He was rewriting the story so that he was the victim. So that my pain was an attack. I started losing my appetite. Food tasted like nothing. My body was running on adrenaline and dread. I would stand in the grocery store aisle staring at shelves, unable to remember why I was there. At night, I'd pick up my phone and scroll mindlessly just to quiet my thoughts. Sometimes I'd catch myself almost wanting to message him, even though we lived in the same house. As if distance could be bridged through a screen more easily than through truth. Our conversations became brittle. Short. One evening, he came home after the kids were asleep. I was sitting at the kitchen table. He paused when he saw me. What? The same sharpness. I looked at him. Where were you? His jaw tightened. I told you. Work. I let out a quiet laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was absurd. He stared at me. What? You keep saying work like it explains everything, I said. It does, he snapped. No, I replied, voice trembling. It doesn't. Not anymore. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You need to stop this. Stop this. Stop noticing. Stop questioning. Stop feeling. I swallowed hard. Or what? I asked before I could stop myself. He stared at me, and for a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Not fear. Not remorse. Something like impatience. Like I was a problem he needed to manage. Then he shook his head. I'm not doing this. And he walked away. Always walking away. That became the pattern. He withdrew, and I collapsed inward. The marriage didn't end in one moment. It ended in 1,000 small absences. In dinners eaten separately. In doors closed quietly. In conversations that never happened. In truth that stayed locked behind denial. I began to feel like I was living in a house with a ghost. The shape of my husband was there. But the person I knew was gone. And the hardest part was that nothing official had happened. No declaration. No decision. Just this slow, suffocating unraveling. I would catch myself looking at old photos. Us smiling at the lake. The kids on his shoulders. Anniversaries. Holidays. And I would feel sick with confusion. Was any of it real? Or had I just been the only one living it? One night, I stood in the hallway outside the basement door. I could hear the murmur of his voice. Low. Careful. The same voice I'd heard before. My hand hovered near the doorknob, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. Because I already knew what that sound meant. And I realized then that our marriage wasn't just broken. It was becoming something unrecognizable. Something I couldn't fix alone. And in that moment, with my hands suspended in the air, I felt the terrifying certainty. That whatever came next would change everything. I thought the discovery would be the worst part. I thought the proof would be the thing that shattered me completely. But in some ways, the aftermath was worse. Because truth doesn't always arrive like a door slamming open. Sometimes it comes in fragments. In drips. In small confirmations that keep cutting you over and over. After the confrontation, after the silence settled into our house like permanent dust, I stopped expecting honesty from him. He had chosen denial. He had chosen to look me in the eye and insist reality was something else. And once someone does that, you start to understand that the truth will never be handed to you cleanly. You have to gather it yourself. I didn't want to. I wasn't proud of what I became in those weeks. I was exhausted. I was numb. But I was also painfully aware that my life was changing without my consent. So I began noticing things differently. Not because I wanted to spy. Because I needed to orient myself in whatever this new reality was. The first pieces were small. Receipts in his pockets for places he never mentioned. A charge on our account for a restaurant he'd never taken me to. When I asked about it, casually, he shrugged. Lunch meeting. Always a meeting. Always an explanation that ended the conversation. But it stopped ending things inside me. Instead, it built a quiet file of inconsistencies. Then there were names. Nothing direct. Just little references. A coworker mentioned in passing. Someone he had to help with a project. Always vague. Always just out of reach. Like he was careful not to say too much. One afternoon, I was folding laundry when his phone buzzed on the counter. He wasn't in the room. The screen lit up. I didn't pick it up. I didn't touch it. But the preview was there. Just a few words. You okay? You seemed upset last night. No name. No signature. But the tenderness in it made my stomach twist. I stared at the screen until it went dark again. My hands were trembling. Because whoever that message was from, it wasn't from me. It wasn't from our children. And it wasn't about work. That was another piece. A soft one. But undeniable. Later, when he walked in, I asked, "Who's texting you?" He didn't miss a beat. Group chat. Work stuff. Work stuff. I nodded. The lie was so smooth it almost impressed me. Almost. I started sleeping even less. Not because I was searching. Because my mind wouldn't stop running. Every night felt like waiting for something to happen. Like waiting for the other shoe to drop. But the shoe never dropped cleanly. It just hovered. I began seeing the affair in the gaps. In the way he smiled at his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. In the way he stepped outside to take calls. In the way he suddenly cared about privacy after 15 years of sharing everything. Once, I walked into the living room unexpectedly and saw him quickly lock his screen. He looked up, expression neutral. "What?" he asked. The word was sharp now, almost defensive by default. I hesitated. Nothing. That was becoming my word. The same way work was becoming his. We were both hiding now. Just in different ways. A week later, I ran into someone he worked with at the grocery store. A woman I vaguely recognized from company events years ago. She smiled politely. "Oh, hey. How have you been?" "Fine," I said automatically. We made small talk. Weather. Kids. Normal things. Then she said, casually, "Your husband's been putting in a lot of hours lately." My chest tightened.
Yeah.
I replied. "He's mentioned work is busy." She nodded. Definitely. He and, well, a couple of them have been staying late a lot. A couple of them. I forced myself to smile. Sounds stressful. She hesitated slightly, like she was considering something. Then she said, "Anyway. Tell him I said hi." I walked away with my heart pounding. That pause. That hesitation. It stayed with me. It wasn't proof. But it felt like someone almost seeing the edge of something and deciding not to name it. Another piece. Not solid. But sharp. The worst part was the way I began to feel like I was watching my own life from outside. Like I was observing a marriage rather than living inside it. He came home, played father, ate dinner, went downstairs. Sometimes he even tried to be normal with me. One night, he asked, "Do you want to watch something?" I stared at him. The question felt surreal. As if we could sit together on a couch while our reality rotted underneath us. "I'm tired," I said. He nodded like that was fine. Like nothing was wrong. A few days after that, I found something else. Not messages this time. Something physical. A small item in his jacket pocket when I was doing laundry. Something that didn't belong to him. Not mine. Not the kids. I held it in my palm, staring at it. My throat tightened. It was so ordinary. So small. But it felt like a screaming confirmation. I didn't confront him. I didn't have the strength for another circle of denial. I just put it back and sat down on the edge of the bed. My hands felt numb. At some point, you stop needing a confession. The truth becomes clear through accumulation. Not one explosion. Just pieces. And the pieces were forming a shape I didn't want. The hardest realization came quietly. It wasn't just that he was having an affair. It was that he was living a separate emotional life. A life where someone else worried about him. Someone else missed him. Someone else got the version of him that still felt present. And I got the walls. I got the irritation. I got the dismissal. I started to see that betrayal wasn't a single act. It was a pattern of choices. The choice to lie. The choice to deny. The choice to make me feel unstable for noticing. The choice to protect himself at the expense of my sanity. One evening, I stood at the kitchen sink, staring out at the dark yard. He was downstairs again. The kids were asleep. I felt unbearably alone. And for the first time, something shifted inside me. Not relief. Not closure. Just clarity. He was not going to give me the truth freely. He was going to let me drown in uncertainty as long as it kept his life easier. And that was its own kind of answer. I didn't yet know what I was going to do with that clarity. I didn't yet know how the story would unfold. But I knew something with certainty for the first time in weeks. The truth was already there. Even if he refused to speak it out loud. I used to think betrayal was a single moment. One decision. One act that crossed a line. But sitting in the quiet aftermath of everything, I realized it isn't that simple. Betrayal is rarely clean. It's rarely contained. It spreads. It reaches backward into memories and forward into your sense of self. It reshapes things you thought were solid. For a long time after the discovery, I kept waiting for the story to become clear. I kept waiting for the moment where everything would make sense. A confession. An apology. Some kind of resolution that would let me file it away as something terrible but understandable. But life didn't offer that. Instead, I lived in a space of unanswered questions. And maybe that was the deepest wound. Not knowing exactly when it started. Not knowing how long I had been living beside someone who was emotionally somewhere else. Not knowing whether I was naive or simply trusting. I thought about the early years a lot. About the man who cried at our wedding. About the father who carried our newborn like something sacred. About the husband who brought soup when I was sick and told me he'd take care of me. Were those moments real? Or were they just temporary? That's the thing about trust. You don't build it expecting it to be dismantled. You build it like a home. Brick by brick. And when it falls apart, you don't just lose the present. You lose the past too. Because suddenly the memories feel unstable. Like they can't be trusted either. I would stand in the hallway sometimes, looking at framed photos. Us at the lake. The kids on his shoulders. Smiling, sunburned, laughing. I'd study his face in those pictures like I might find an answer hidden there. Was he already capable of this then? Or did something change later? And if something changed, when? That question haunted me more than the messages. Because the messages were obvious. The messages were proof. But the shift, the why, the slow erosion, that was harder. It made me realize how little we truly know about another person, even after years. I also thought about myself. About the way I had doubted my own instincts for so long. About the way I let him dismiss me. The way I apologized when I should have demanded honesty. I didn't recognize that version of me at first. The quiet one. The shrinking one. But now, looking back, I understand. When you build your life around someone, you become afraid of what happens if they are not who you believed. You become afraid that if you pull too hard on the thread, the whole fabric will unravel. So you stay still. You hope. You tell yourself you're overthinking. And sometimes, the person lying to you counts on that hope. They count on your reluctance. They count on your love. That's an uncomfortable truth. Love can be used. Trust can be exploited. And the saddest part is that it doesn't always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like simple denial. Like shrugging. Like you're imagining things. Sometimes betrayal comes wrapped in normalcy. I started noticing how people talk about affairs in simple terms. Cheating. Infidelity. As if it's just a physical line crossed. But for me, it wasn't the physical part that felt like the deepest violation. It was the rewriting of reality. The way he could look at me and insist nothing was happening. The way he could make me question my own eyes. That was its own kind of abuse of trust. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just corrosive. It made me realize that betrayal isn't always about what someone does with another person. Sometimes it's about what they do to you in the process. The lies. The minimization. The way they protect themselves by making you feel unstable. I don't know if he understood the damage. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't want to. Maybe it was easier for him to live in denial than face what he was destroying. That's the part one still wrestle with. Was he cruel? Or was he cowardly? Was it calculated? Or was it selfishness without reflection? People like simple villains. Simple explanations. But real life is messier. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a stranger who swept in to ruin me. He was my husband. The man who shared my bed. The father of my children. The person I built routines around. And that made it harder. Because the person who hurt me was also the person I had loved for half my life. Sometimes I wonder what forgiveness even means in a situation like that. Is forgiveness about absolving the other person? Or is it about releasing yourself from carrying the weight? And if someone never fully admits what they did? If they never take responsibility? What exactly are you forgiving? A version of events that stays unspoken? A truth that remains fragmented? There were days I wanted him to beg. To cry. To break down and tell me everything. Not because I wanted drama. Because I wanted validation. I wanted to know I wasn't crazy. I wanted him to confirm what I already knew so I could stop living in fog. But he didn't. And maybe that was a choice too. Some people would rather let silence do the work. Let ambiguity soften the edges. Let time blur the betrayal. But time doesn't blur everything. Some wounds stay sharp. I also thought about my children. About what they saw. About the way tension settles into a household even when no one speaks it aloud. About the example we set, whether we mean to or not. What does it teach them to watch a mother shrink? What does it teach them to watch a father disappear behind excuses? That question hurt more than anything. Because my marriage wasn't just mine. It was the environment my children grew up inside. And I couldn't pretend that didn't matter. There were nights I lay awake and asked myself the hardest question. If someone can betray you and deny it. If they can fracture your reality and still sleep peacefully. What does loyalty even mean? Is loyalty just convenience? Is it just something people offer until something else feels easier? Or is it something deeper? Something sacred? And if it is sacred, how do you survive when it's broken? I don't have perfect answers. I'm still sitting with the pieces. Still learning what it means to trust myself again. Still learning what it means to build a life that isn't anchored to someone else's choices. But I know this. The betrayal changed me. Not because it made me bitter. Because it made me awake. It made me understand that love doesn't protect you from being hurt. Time doesn't guarantee honesty. And commitment, on its own, is only words unless it's backed by truth. Sometimes I think about that woman on the other side of the messages. The one who wrote "miss you." I don't even know her. I don't know what she believed. I don't know what he told her. Maybe she thought she was special. Maybe she thought he was trapped. Maybe she didn't care. I'll never fully know. And maybe that's another kind of grief. The unanswered parts. The missing pieces. The story that will never be complete. But the question that stays with me most isn't even about him. It's about what we, as people, accept. What we excuse. What we tolerate in the name of love, or family, or history. At what point does loyalty become self-abandonment? At what point does forgiveness become permission? And when someone breaks your trust and then insists you're overreacting. When they deny the truth you can see with your own eyes. How do you decide what you owe them? And what you owe yourself? Because that's the question I still can't answer cleanly. And I wonder, honestly. What would you do?